Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to learn about the literary forms that is there in our English literature. So English literature, as we know, is a vast and dynamic field, and it is filled with various literary forms that shape the way our stories, emotion and ideas are expressed. So in short, if I say these literary forms, they are the ways or they are the mediums through which we express our stories, emotion, and feelings. So these forms are broadly classified into three major types, that is poetry, prose, and drama. And each of them containing some several categories and some unique characteristics. So let's explore them, all of them in details. Okay, so first we are going to talk about poetry. So poetry is a literary form that uses the rhythmic aesthetic qualities of language to convey our emotions, idea and stories. So it's mostly the poetry is mostly has a rhythmic meter, okay, and it often employs some meter, rhythm and figurative languages. And we have some types of poetry, but before that, in short, if I say, poetry is the art of our expression but in a verse form. And we know also that poetry is one of the oldest and most expressive literary forms. It also uses rhythm, meter, and figurative language that makes poetry rich. And that we'll know how they make the poetry rich through the types of poetry. So first we are going to talk about the lyrical poetry. So lyrical poetry has some characteristics. The first characteristics of lyrical poetry, that it expresses our personal emotion and thoughts, and the lyrical poetry is very short and song like. And there are some examples that comes under lyrical poetry, that is sonnets, odes and elegies. Let's learn a bit about what of them are. Okay, so sonnet is a 14-line poem that follows a set of rhyme scheme and meter. As we already discussed that lyric poetry's characteristics, it was short and song-like. So as sonnet comes under the category of lyrical poetry. So it is a 14-line poem that follows a set of rhyme scheme and meter. We'll learn about some examples later, but for just now, remember that sonnet is a 14-line poem that follows a set of rhyme scheme and meter. Next, there is odes. So ode, it is a formal poem that praises or celebrates a person, place, thing or idea. And if we talk about then elegy is a kind of poem in which the speaker or the poet expresses their grief, sadness or loss. Let's learn about some of the examples. Okay, so if I particularly talk about sonnets, so Shakespeare's sonnets are the most famous sonnets of our English literature, and we should read about all the Shakespeare's sonnets because from exam point of view they are mostly important. Next, we have ode. So, John Keats has written several of odes, and as we already discussed, that ode is a formal poem that praises and celebrates person and place or a thing or idea. So here, John Keats, one of the example was Ode to Nightingale by John Keats. So here in the poem, John Keats had praised the song that expresses the pain and immortality sang by the nightingale, the bird. Okay, and in elegy, as we see, this is the example of elegy of Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. Because why it is a elegy, as we talked about the characteristics of elegy, that a elegy is a poem in which the speaker or poet expresses grief, sadness or loss. So this particular work, elegy written in a country church, is its setting was in a graveyard, and we can see the poet was lamenting over a loss or death. So it is a great example of Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. Next, now let's move forward and talk about the narrative poetry. It's another form of lyrical poetry. So the only category of or characteristics of narrative poetry is that it tells a story with characters, plot and conflict. But it is in a poetry form. It is in a poem. So some examples of narrative poetry are epics, ballads, idylls. So epics what we call epics. Epics are those kind of poems that tells the story of a hero, often set in a cultural, historical, or religious setting. For example, we can see that Mahabharata was known as the greatest epic of all the time. Why? Because we can see in Mahabharata, we all must have read about Mahabharata. So in Mahabharata, there is a story of several of heroes, and the setting we can see that in Mahabharata also the setting was a cultural, historical, or religious setting. Now there is ballad. So ballad tells a story that is often set to music. It means it is a type of folk music. Okay. Now there is idylls. What are idylls? Idylls is a short kind of poem, and it is descriptive of rustic life, written in the style of Theocritus' short pastoral poem. Here, why I have mentioned about Theocritus' short pastoral poem, because we can see in Homer's epics or in Homer's poems, he has portrayed a hero-like qualities. But in idylls, there is a description about the rustic life. Okay, it's a pastoral kind of poem. And if you all have must read about John Milton's Paradise Lost, you must have know that this is considered under an epic. And the ballad, one of the example of the ballad was Rime of Ancient Mariner by S.T. Coleridge, because we learned in the characteristics of ballad that it tells a story that is often set to music. And if anyone of you has read about Rime of Ancient Mariner, you must have you must have know that the Rime of Ancient Mariner is a dramatic way of storytelling. There is a dramatic mode of telling a story. Next, there is idylls. So idylls, one of the famous examples of idylls, that is Idylls of King by Lord Alfred Tennyson. So Idylls of the King is considered an idyll. Why? Because it is a collection of narrative poem that depict a pastoral or a idealized scene. So in this case, if we talk about particularly about the work Idylls of King, we have seen that Arthurian legend, which is often associated with the themes of chivalry, nobility, and a view of medieval life. The word idyll itself refers to a short poem that describes about some peaceful rural scene. So Tennyson's Idylls of the King based of the captures the essence through its portrayal of King Arthur's reign and the Knights of the Round Table. Now I hope you all have been understanding what I am trying to tell. Now let's talk about the dramatic poetry. That is another form of poetry. Okay, so the dramatic poetry's characteristics is that the poetry is written in a dialogue form that is meant to be performed. So one of the if we talk about what is under dramatic poetry, there comes dramatic monologue. So dramatic monologue is a speech that is given by a character that reveals their inner thoughts, motivations, or feelings. For example, there is a famous example of dramatic monologue, that is Robert Browning's famous poem, My Last Duchess. Now, let's talk about another literary form, that is prose. So prose is written or spoken language in its ordinary form without some metrical structure, because in poetry we have learned that in the poetry, how we'll know that it is a poetry, it has some metrical structure, it has some rhythm, some metrical structure. But in prose there is no metrical structure. It also include some fiction and non-fiction. Now let's talk about the types of prose. So in types of prose we have fiction and non-fiction, and under fiction also we have so many categories. Now let's learn. So fiction, what is a fiction? So fiction is a narrative form that creates from imagination, though it may be inspired by some real events. So fiction is the imaginative way of storytelling, in short, if I say. Now there are some forms of fiction also. So first there is novel. How will know it is a novel? We all must have read about novel, but do we all actually know that what is the characteristics of a novel? If someone asks us that, tell us how we'll know that it is a novel. So for that we have to know about the characteristics of the novel. So a novel is a long narrative it is a long narrative with multiple characters and a complex plot. For example, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Great Expedition by Charles Dickens, and there are so many examples of novels. But novel is a long narrative work with multiple characters and a very complex plot. Means one story leads to another. Now there is novella. So novella is the short form of the novel. So a short novel with fewer characters and a focused theme. Because in novel we see that it is a long narrative with multiple characters and complex plot. But in novel it is a short form of novel with fewer characters and it has only a single focus. It focuses on a single theme. For example, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad is one of the greatest novella of our modern age. Now there is short story. So short story is a brief narrative with a single plot and limited characters. For example, the Telltale Hat, if you have read about the Telltale Hat by Edgar Allan Poe, also besides in our literature, we have read so many short stories in our childhood and even now we read so many short stories. So short stories characteristics was that it is a brief narrative with a single plot and limited characteristics. Okay, now if we talk about fable, so fable is a short story with a moral lesson. In the end of the fable, we learn about a moral lesson and it often uses animals as characters. So for example, Aesop's Fabulous, it was one of the famous fable, and you'll see that in children books also, they often use animals and characters, and in the end, we have a moral lesson to tell the students or the children. Okay, next there is myth. So myth is a traditional story that explains the natural or supernatural events. For example, Greek and Norse in mythology, if we talk about some of the classical literature's works, we'll see that the theme of mythology was very much presented there. Now, if we talk about non-fiction, as I already said, prose is divided into two types, that is fiction and non-fiction. So, non-fiction deals with facts, real people and events. Whereas we talked about that fiction is the imaginative way of storytelling. It is created from our imagination. Okay, but non-fiction deals with the facts, real people and events. So there are also, like fiction, there are forms of non-fiction as well. So the first form of non-fiction was essay. So in school or in colleges, we must have wrote some essays. So essay is a short literary composition that is based on a particular subject. In school we get a topic that write on a particular topic, means we have to write on that particular subject. So it's a short literary composition. We compose that essay on that particular subject and we write. For example, if we talk about our literature, so there is Essays of Elia. So Charles Lamb's Essays of Elia was one of the most famous essay. Now, there is biography. So, biography is a life story that is written by someone else. Suppose my life story and someone else is writing that, then that will be considered as a biography. For example, the life of Samuel Johnson was written by James Boswell. Means James Boswell has written the biography of the Samuel Johnson and the book was named as The Life of Samuel Johnson. Now, there is autobiography. So, in biography, what I have learned that someone else writes someone else's life story. But in autobiography, the same person, suppose I am the subject, means I am writing on my own life. Okay, so a life story written by the subject themselves. For example, the story of my experiment with truth, that is written by Mahatma Gandhi. So this particular whatever is there in the book, the story of my experiments with truth, was simply based on Mahatma Gandhi's life itself, and the book was also written by Mahatma Gandhi. Now there is memoir. So memoir is the personal account of specific events or experiences. So it is somehow similar like autobiography, but in autobiography we include the person's whatever happens in the person's life. The person itself includes whatever happens in his life. But in memoir, it is a personal account of some specific events or experiences that the person faces. Okay, for example, I know why the case bar scene by Maya Angelou was one of the greatest memoir of all the time. Now there is travel writing. So travel writing was a narrative that is based on real journey. As we discussed that non-fiction was all about the real life events, real people and real things. So travel writing was a narrative that is based on real journey. For example, the travels of Marco Polo. Suppose you are going on a traveling tour, and you decided after facing a certain event or a certain tragic incident or maybe a normal incident, you decided to write a book on that. Then that comes under the travel writing. Now we are going to learn about the third literary form, that is drama. So drama is a form of literature that is meant to be performed on stage with dialogues, character and action. So drama is literature that is performed on the stage. So it is a literature that is meant to be performed rather than read. And also we have some types of drama. So there is the first type of drama that I'm going to talk is tragedy. So tragedy is a serious play that ends in the downfall of the protagonist. So if you're the audience and you are watching a drama being performed on the stage, and at the end of the drama you'll see that the protagonist have a very major downfall. So that particular drama will be coming under the tragedy. For example, if you have read Hamlet, that is written by William Shakespeare, you will notice how the downfall of the protagonist happens. Now there is comedy. So comedy is a humorous play with a happy ending that is exactly opposite to our tragedy. For example, The Importance of Being Honest by Oscar Wilde is a very famous comedy. And now we have tragic comedy, that is the mixture of tragedy and comedy. So it is a mixture of tragedy and comedy with both serious and some humorous elements. So in school you all must have read about The Tempest by Shakespeare. So I think now you can relate what is a tragic comedy is. Now there is melodrama. We all do drama, and when it gets excess, that is considered as melodrama. I'm just joking. So over the top drama with exaggerated emotion. For example, Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, was one of the best melodrama actually I have read. So melodrama is when the drama happens excessively, means there is some exaggeration of emotion, and the audience can even know that okay, they are exaggerating the emotions they are expressing in a very exaggerated manner. Now let's talk about farce. So farce is a comedy with absurd and exaggerated situation. For example, The Comedy of Errors by Shakespeare was a farce comedy. Now let's talk about, there are some other literary forms as well. For example, there is letter and diaries, which expresses our personal reflection and historical records. Like suppose whatever I am feeling in a day, I am writing in my diary. So what happens? That happens a personal reflection, and also some historical records also we can write in diaries. For example, the diary of Samuel Pepys. First, he invented this diary that is invented by Samuel Pepys. Now, there is satire. So satire is literature that mocks or criticizes society, politics, or human nature. So there are so many stand-up comedies happening right now, and we can see that there are so many themes based on which they are satirizing some people or some inconvenience that is being happened in the society. So Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift is a famous political allegory or political satire. It's not an allegory, sorry, it's a political satire. Now there is Allegory. So Allegory is a it's a story with a deeper moral political or spiritual meaning. Means behind the story we'll find a deeper moral, political or spiritual meaning that is hidden in that story. Okay, for example, George Orwell's Animal Farm is a famous allegory. Now, if we talk about Gothic literature, so Gothic literature is a blend of horror, romance, and supernatural elements. For example, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Dracula by Bram Stoker, they are some of the famous Gothic literature books. Now, in the end, we have stream of consciousness. It's very much important from our exam point of view. So, what is the characteristics of the stream of consciousness? So, it's a narrative technique that presents thoughts as a continuous flow. For example, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf was one of the greatest theme we will find under stream of consciousness. Also, James Joyce Ulysses is also one of the stream of consciousness techniques, way of technique under which we'll find this work. So, from the lyrical beauty of the poetry to the gripping narratives of prose and theatrical brilliance of drama, each literary form enriches our understanding of the world. So, let me know in the comments which literary form do you find the most interesting, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more literary insight. And those who want the PDF of this whole video, they can ask me in the comments. I'll send them the PDF, and I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, be safe and keep loving literature.